So again, good morning to everyone. I am Marla Hamilton here at PIDC, and we want to welcome you to our series, our two-part series on buying and financing commercial real estate. This is a standard series that PIDC has been hosting for the last several years, and our presenter is Dorothy Hamill, Esquire, who is a very significant real estate attorney here in the city, who we have had the benefit of working with for several years. Just on announcements, we want you to interact during this webinar. You can choose to use the chat function where you just type in your question or your comment. We are monitoring the chat and will respond to you. We encourage you also to use the raise hand function. If you use the raise hand function, we're assuming that you want to talk live. And so we will unmute your mic and you can ask your question or make your comment. If you're the shy type though, and you want to stay anonymous, then we encourage you to use the Q&A function where you can privately ask your question, make your comment, and we will respond to you privately. If it is a question or comment that will benefit the entire group, then we will ask that question publicly, but we will not use your name. For the part 2 of this series, it will be on next Thursday. So same time, same day, May 19th, we're going to talk about the financing. So you're going to get on today everything that you need to know about buying real estate. And then on next week, we're going to talk about all of the financing functions and the options for financing your purchase. For those of you who have heard about the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, but have not taken that deeper dive, we encourage you, strongly encourage every business owner to take advantage of business education. And this is one of the stellar, award-winning, gold standard business education programs. I know there are several of you who are on today's webinar who are graduates, who are alumni of this program. So we applaud you. But for those of you who have not yet learned about the program, we encourage you to join us on May 17th, where we will have an information session. One of the things we did with the information sessions this year is we have hosted one in each time of the day. So we did one in the morning, we did one in the afternoon, and then this one on May 17th, we're doing in the evening from 6 p.m. until 7. So we encourage you to join us, and this will be for the cohort that will begin in the fall, cohort 28. So for those of you who started in cohort 1, 2, 3, we are all the way in 28. More upcoming webinars on June 7th. We have partnered with Independence, Blue Cross, AmeriHealth, Caritas, the Economy League's PAGE initiative, and we are partnering with Goldman Sachs. We are offering a panel discussion with alumni of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses, who also are PIDC borrowers. And so you will get the benefit of hearing from live business owners who took advantage of the business education, who took advantage of the PIDC financing. And they're going to share with you what it has meant to have that business education and to have PIDC financing. So we encourage you to please make sure you join us on June 7th. I want to tell you who the panelists are, because the panelists are real important to you. We did this event on earlier in this month with another panel. We had Lisa Robinson of My Independence at Home, Mia Levesque of Yikes, Michael Brown of Environmental Construction Services, and Bridget Daniel Corbin of Wilcox Electronics. That was the first panel. This second panel is going to include Natasha Struther of Struther Enterprises, a food service company that is in stadiums and convention centers. We will also have Jeanette Harris, who is the owner of Financial Integrity Resources Management, an insurance firm. We will also have Lynn Thomas, who is the CEO of EMSCO Supra, which recently constructed a brand new facility in the West Parkside Industrial Park. And we will have Pecha Chang, who is the owner of, if you don't know Vault and Vine, which is a very creative and cutting edge florist, design florist in Manayunk. Then you need to make it there, but those will be our panelists for that event. June 7th at 10 o'clock. So please make sure you go to the PIDC website and register. And once you're on the website, please make sure you join our newsletter so you get to hear about everything that's coming up with PIDC. Also, make sure you're following us on all of our social media platforms. If you happen to miss any of our webinars, you are in luck because we replay them on YouTube and on the PIDC blog. And then the last thing, we're slowly emerging out of the effects of the pandemic, but once you are on the PIDC website, you will see there are still entities that are providing funding for COVID. One of our partners is Comcast Rise. If you have not taken advantage of Comcast Rise and its financing, grant, and its marketing support, we encourage you to do that. They have just opened a new application period. We will get more information to you on that because we want to make sure Philadelphia is one of multiple cities that was selected by Comcast. We want to make sure that businesses in Philadelphia are taking advantage of the grant, which has a deadline in June. And again, we will give you that information before we end today. But we also want to make sure that you are taking advantage of the marketing component. So with that, we're going to start with Dorothy. So Dorothy Hamill is a attorney, a partner in Searle and Lesser. She has been practicing law for a long enough time for her to be a subject matter expert.
Thank you.
Long enough to be a subject matter expert. And her area, she knows the nuances and the intricacies of the City of Philadelphia's zoning board and L&I. And if you are buying real estate and you're a developer, whether you're a small developer, medium developer, large developer, you know a good real estate attorney who understands zoning is worth their weight in gold. And so you can have the best idea about buying real estate, but if you lack the right professional team around you, you can literally spend years trying to get your project off the ground. And so PIDC is fortunate. Not only has Dorothy been leading these webinars for us for several years, but Dorothy is also the attorney for several real estate developers, some of whom are PIDC clients. So we understand the value that she brings. We are always committed to bringing to you the best, highest quality subject matter experts. And one of the things that they do not charge PIDC for their services here. Coming to this webinar, sharing their legal expertise, what they generally charge their clients for, this information is being presented to you free of charge. However, when you decide that you need her services, she's going to charge you. But we will stand by our commitment to bringing before you the highest quality professionals that we know will give you outstanding service. And that is what you do not want to sacrifice. And so when you're in this market of real estate, whether you're an owner, occupied owner, and you're looking for transitioning out of leasing or renting, and now you want to buy. And Dorothy's going to talk about that, buying or lease. She's going to cover all of that today. But whether it is you're transitioning from leasing to acquisition, or you're already in a building and maybe you want to do some upgrades, you want to build an extension, all of those things are real estate. And for the best owner, you are an expert in your particular business, but you are not an expert in real estate law. And so make sure that you are getting, we always say there are just a few experts that you need on your team as any business. You need a good lawyer, you need a good accountant. And then when you start to drill down within your specific industry, you need those professionals who know your industry. So all lawyers are not alike. If you've got a health issue, then you want a lawyer who specializes in healthcare. That's not where you would want the real estate, unless the real estate lawyer represents hospitals in hospital real estate transactions. But you want to make sure you've got the appropriate professionals according to your specific industry. So with that, it is, again, we want to welcome you here. Thank you. It is 9:39, and we are here until 11:30 today. So again, we want you to take advantage of the chat function, input your question or your comment in the chat. We are monitoring that, or use the raise hand function. You use the raise hand function, we're going to unmute your mic and let you ask your question live. Again, if you lean to the shy side, and you know what, sometimes people think that their question is not a good question, and so they don't want to ask it publicly, and we appreciate that. Use the Q&A function, but I can almost guarantee you, when you use the Q&A function and we look at your question or your comment, it's going to be something that's going to benefit the entire group, but we will still maintain your anonymity, and we will just ask the question in general. So with that, it is a pleasure to, again, this is the first time virtually, Dorothy, since we have not done this since, I don't know, was it?
I know. Did we do it last year?
I don't think we did it last year.
We did it virtually.
We did?
I'm not sure if it was, we did.
Okay, so everybody, we are not yet back in the PIDC offices for the public. We are in the office just working in generally, but we have not yet reopened our offices. But we are fortunate for the virtual opportunity because some of you would not be able to make it if you had to schlep down to Center City to our office. So virtual is absolutely in our future, even when we fully reopen. So with that, here is our dear friend, Dorothy Hamill, Esquire partner at Sierra and Lesser Benson Professional Corporation. Dorothy, take it away.
Okay. Morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I hope that the next hour and 20 minutes will be helpful and informative for you. I'm going to apologize in advance because I have 3 dogs, and I have no doubt that in the course of the next hour and 20 minutes, somebody's going to do something that you're going to hear. Sorry. So what we're going to cover in a broad sense today is buying commercial real estate, and particularly looking at some of the issues in the city. Much of what I'm going to tell you is really information that you can use anywhere. But as we're in Philadelphia, some of the things that I'm going to talk about are really Philadelphia. Oh my gosh. Really more geared towards Philadelphia. Lord. Okay. So let me, Marla. Okay. Okay. So the first question, obviously, when you're looking to buy commercial real estate is, where do I find it? How do I go about finding it? So, obviously it depends on what kind of property you're looking for. Are you looking for vacant land? Are you looking for office space, warehouse space, space for you to grow? You're an existing business and you've decided that you want your own space. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be able to add an extra layer in that over the course of the last year, I've actually been in this process on a personal level for a small business that my husband and I are a part of. So we were looking to buy our own space. We were, 5 years existing and then looking to find our own space. So, it seems daunting. Where do you start? So there's a couple of places. The city of Philadelphia a couple years ago established the land bank. So, and I've provided the link to their website on the slide. And on that website, you can look at the properties that the city has acquired through various methods and look in the areas that you're looking for different kinds of properties. PIDC and PAID are certainly good resources. They have their finger in the pie of everyone in the real estate market, knowing who's doing what. They're very much up to date. So if you have a relationship, that's certainly one way to find property, because they're going to be able to direct you they may be able to direct you either to a person, to a broker, to one of their clients, someone who may have what you're looking for. Obviously, a real estate broker is, I think the easy one that people think of, and that's certainly one method and a good one. But as with anything and anyone that you hire, you want to make sure that this is someone that you're comfortable with, someone you're sure feels that you feel has an understanding of what you're looking for. You don't want to get somebody who's a residential condo broker in Center City who's selling $1 million condos when you're looking for warehouse space in Northern Liberties. That person's not going to be the right fit for you. So there's nothing wrong with, just as a contractor, you talk to a bunch of people, you get different prices. Well, the same with the real estate broker. Talk to a couple people, talk to friends. That's the way you're going to find someone who's going to be the right fit for you. Sheriff sales and tax sales are also another, and mortgage foreclosure sales sort of all go together. And they are definitely places that you can find property, particularly if you're looking for single family, 2-family properties. But I would, as I do with clients, I caution you. If you are thinking about using sheriff sales or mortgage foreclosure sales to acquire property and you've never done it before, you want to make sure that you go to a couple sales first, because what you're going to find there is you're going to find people who are the professionals. They're there every day that there's a sale, and they have relationships with the attorneys who are representing the lenders that are selling the properties. So it's a very fast-paced, quick environment. And so you want to feel comfortable in that environment so that you either don't get intimidated by it or you don't get caught up in it because people are bidding and you decided that you had to have this property and then you end up spending more for the property because you got caught up in the moment. If you're going to do that, visit once or twice, make sure you're comfortable, and then when you pick a property that you want to bid on, you want to make sure that you have your financials in hand when you go in, so that if you know you're going to buy the property, you want the property at 123 State Street, and your maximum bid is $15, you want to make sure that you don't end up spending $20 because you got caught up in the moment, you got competitive, you weren't paying attention. So that's important when you're talking about those kind of sales, because you're going up against professionals and networks, in your business, in your area. There's people who know people who know people. I mean, we find this out all the time in every aspect of life. You mentioned to someone, oh, I'm looking for an industrial property in Northern Liberties. And somebody says, oh, my cousin, he works for somebody who does warehouse brokering in Fishtown. He might be able to help you. So the more people you put yourself out to, the more opportunity you have that you'll come across somebody who may know somebody who'll be able to help you. Somebody also had in the chat had mentioned, Facebook groups and Craigslist for ways of finding properties. There's certainly other methods. Obviously, with anything on the internet, you obviously want to make sure that you do your due diligence so that you're getting what you expect you're getting. You don't want to take any chances. Any deal that seems too good to be true is 99.8% of the time is too good to be true. Okay. So what type of property do you want to buy? Do you want to buy a row home or a condominium? A lot of people are, we talked about this in our pre-planning for this seminar, is, there's a lot of people out there who are buying single family duplexes for, individual rentals. So, again, the, sheriff sales and tax sales are a place to do that. Condominiums. Do you want commercial property? Are you looking for, do you want to buy multifamily? Do you want to buy an office building? Do you want to buy a storefront space that has residential on the top? That's certainly a value-added kind of purchase for small business owners, because if you can get a property on the first that has enough commercial space on the first floor for you, and has 2 or 3 residential units on the second floor, that will help give you additional money that will help pay your mortgage, which in turn gives you more money to be able to put into your business to grow your business. So that's something that you want to think about, is if you're looking for a small commercial space, hey, maybe if I look at something that's got something else attached to it, maybe it's a commercial building that has 2 commercial spaces so that you could find another commercial tenant. And in going through that process, if you're working for a broker who's familiar with that area, they may be able to help you get a lead on getting another tenant for the building. So, anytime that you can purchase a property that will give you added value is only going to help you, give you more money to be able to grow your business. Industrial, industrial is a very, particular area, and, knowing where those industrial pockets are, what kind of properties are available, what size, that's particularly an area, I think, where an industrial real estate broker can help you, because again, those pockets within the city and frankly, throughout the country have changed, where they are, how big they are, and where you can find them, particularly if, you have some industrial kind of business that, doesn't lend itself to being, close to residential. That's really important. And that's a niche that, a professional can really help you with. Vacant land, are you looking to do a ground up construction? Obviously that's a much bigger project. Depending on what you're doing, if you were, you just want to build, we represent people who just buy single vacant properties, put up a single family and sell those. Others buy a bigger lot, do multifamily, large residential or commercial construction. So, it all depends on what your goal is. But before you get started, obviously, as you're putting together your plan on what you want to do, you're zeroing in on what kind of property do I really want? What makes the most sense for me? So, should you buy or lease? That is a big question that comes up. And it depends on your business. Frankly, if you're a startup, buying a business can be harder. You don't have a financial history, particularly if you're a small business, cash flow is an issue. So maybe it makes more sense to lease a property for a couple of years to get yourself established, then look to buy. Another possibility is if you find a space you like, the owner wants to sell, maybe you could do some sort of a lease purchase where, the owner agrees you could lease it for a certain period of time, credit you a certain amount of your rent against the purchase price, and then give you the option to purchase after a certain period of time. That's a way where you can establish your credit history, establish your business, so that then when you are ready, you're in a better position to approach a lender. And location is important. The adage, location, location, location in real estate is certainly true, but it really is location, location, location for you. What is your market? What is your business? Where is it best for you to be? I mean, you may say, wow, I've always wanted to have a storefront on Chestnut Street, but your business doesn't support that now. It may be better being a couple blocks off of that until you were a couple blocks, you wanted to be at 12th, maybe you're up at 30th, and that allows you to get started. And then eventually you can move back, you can think about moving back into the area that you really want to be in, or you may find that that's not really where you needed to be, that your business target is really, the Northern Liberties or Fishtown or West Oak Lane. You really, as you're developing your business plan, that's part of what you're thinking about is where is my target? Where do I think I will do best? And then you're going to narrow in on that area. And if you narrow in and you're narrowing in on an area that is an expensive market, that it may be that you say, okay, let me rent for X period of time, and then that will give me some time to build up so that, my 5-year plan, I'll be in a position to be able to buy a property. And in putting together your business plan, I do tend to find sometimes that people, which you wouldn't think, but people sort of gloss over the numbers a little bit, like, oh, I can make this work, or I generally have $10. That's enough for what I want to do. But, you don't think about all of the costs that may be involved. With renting a commercial property, you're talking triple net, which means you're paying the base rent plus you're paying the additional rent charges, which are typically common area costs to operate the building, the insurance that the landlord carries on the building, and real estate taxes. If you're in a big building, you pay, whatever your share is based on the entire size of the building. And then you have a fit out. Is the landlord going to give you any money for a fit out? Are you going to have to do it all on your own? When you're talking about a loan, there's a lot that goes into even a small business loan. There are costs, appraisals, credit fees, your interest, your attorney fees. If you're going through a bank and the bank has an attorney, you're paying the bank's lender, the bank's attorney's legal fees. You're paying, oftentimes you're paying a fee to the bank, a half a point of the loan. So you really want to sit down and know your numbers cold before you make those decisions, because I've had people who've, gotten themselves into a situation where they thought, and have come to us and said, I really thought I could do this. But then you find out in talking to them that there wasn't as much due diligence on their finances. They weren't expecting certain costs, they were, trying to do it on their own, which is certainly understandable. But, when you don't have the full picture, that can end up coming back and biting you. Do I need a lawyer? Now, of course, I'm a lawyer, and you would expect that I would say, of course you do. But I think in many cases, you really do when you're buying commercial real estate. There's a lot that goes into the process and determining what you're doing, where you're buying, how you're buying, what the structure is going to be. And a lawyer can really help you with that. And, I've had a lot of people who've come to me who've bought properties and said, particularly in the residential market, have said, well, I bought this as a 3-unit apartment and I just got a violation from the city that it's single family. And it's because, it may be your first or second time doing it, you didn't know, and you relied on what the seller told you. And then you go into the city zoning records and find, oh, they never got approval for 3-family. So it's very important that when you're making a purchase, a commercial purchase, that you talk to somebody, that you get advice and input, because they can help you in that process, figuring out, the who, what, where, when, of getting from the beginning to the end, and at the end, getting exactly what you think you were planning to get. How do you choose a lawyer? There's, certainly a lot of ways. Asking your friends, family, fellow developers, people that you know in the real estate market who have used somebody, you may even, it doesn't even have to be a real estate lawyer. Your cousin may have used somebody who's in a firm, and they also have somebody who's a real estate lawyer. So you may say, hey, let me talk to that person. And again, the same as I mentioned with the broker, the same is true with an attorney. An attorney is going to help you in the process, and it has to be somebody that you trust and have confidence is giving you the right direction. And so interview them, talk to them on the phone. Again, personality isn't everything, but it's part of the process, because you have to feel comfortable with that person. You don't have to be their best friend, but you have to know that they know your plan are on board with getting you to the finish line in the time period that you expect and in the manner you expect. There's different attorney referral services. Google reviews, I'm not a huge fan of that, because I think generally in most things, people end up reviewing more often when they're unhappy than when they're happy. So I think sometimes you need to take that with a grain of salt, because the person could have represented 500 people who were happy, and 2 people who weren't happy are the only 2 people who left a review. So, while certainly you're going to look at it, I think, you need to dig a little bit more than that. The Bar Association has a referral service that you can reach out to them. PIDC, and they work with people. They can certainly give you some ideas. Other maybe city agencies that you deal with may be able to give you some direction, or direct you to somebody who could help you. There's a lot of resources out there, and a lot of ways to find a lawyer. But the most important part is making sure you're hiring the right lawyer for you. So if you've decided you're going to buy, what's next? Oftentimes people like to do what's called a letter of intent, and it's non-binding, but it basically is you and the seller have said, okay, before we get to the stage of drafting an agreement, I want to find out if we really are on the same page. So you're going to identify the property, the purchase price, how much the deposit is, your due diligence period. The due diligence period is a period of time that you will have from the time you sign the agreement until, on a smaller project is going to be no more than 30 days. And that time period allows you to investigate anything and everything about the property. You can look at the zoning, you can look at the condition of the property, you can have your contractors come out to evaluate. You're going to investigate the title of the property to make sure, you don't end up with a property that has something running through the middle of it. We recently had somebody come to us who bought a property for development and found out that there was a gas, water, and cable line all running through the middle of the property, which obviously presents an issue with trying to develop. It can be developed, but now it's much more expense, because you have to get these city agencies and a giant like Comcast or Verizon to agree to move those lines. And if they move those lines, it's going to be at your expense. And so those are all the kind of things that you want to have an opportunity to investigate. And you can decide at the end of that time period for any reason. You don't have to have a reason. And that's critical. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the agreement of sale, but that's critical, is you can decide at for any reason at all. You don't have to give any reason, that you can terminate the agreement, get your deposit back. Condition of title. This is very important, particularly in the city, particularly because we have, as we've read in the paper, city officials have talked about, we have issues with tangled title in Philadelphia. And this is, particularly true with single family or, 2-family properties. People have died, the property sits there for years and years, somebody, then one heir may emerge years later and they want to sell the property, but, it may turn out that there's 4 other heirs that have a right. So that one person can't sell the property on their own. We've had situations with people who have outright stolen title. And, we've done some work with people to help them get title to their properties back. So somebody just raised a question, with the letter of intent being non-binding, how can you get a homeowner to agree to this if they are motivated to sell since it's non-binding? It depends on the kind of property. If you're talking about a single family property that you're buying for renting, you're going to buy a house in, West Oak Lane, because that's going to be your first rental property. A letter of intent may not be appropriate. It may be, particularly now the real estate market has not settled at all. So people are still, selling quickly and selling above listing price. So it may be that in that kind of transaction, you don't need a letter of intent. It depends on the kind of transaction that you're doing. Again, single family residential for rent, probably you're not going to get somebody to agree to that because they have 4 other people behind them who are looking to buy. But if you're looking to invest in a commercial property of any significance, you are going to need the opportunity to do your due diligence. You're going to have an opportunity to review the property on a single family residential because 95% of the time you're going to use the standard form agreement of sale from the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors, and that provides for a window of inspections. But remember, that's going to be a little bit different because they're going to treat that as a strict residential purchase. So you want to be careful when you're reviewing those agreements. Closing, what timing do you need for closing? Most, if not, I'll say most, 95% of commercial transactions are not contingent on getting a mortgage. So as in a residential sale, you have a mortgage contingency, which gives you a time to get a mortgage to pay for the property. And if you don't get it, you can terminate, get your money back and move on. In a commercial deal, that's not the case. Doesn't prevent you from getting a mortgage. It just means that you can't get your money back if you don't get a mortgage. So there'll be no reference to a mortgage in your commercial agreement of sale. You have to make sure in your due diligence period, between your due diligence period and then your closing period, that gives you enough time to get a lender on board, get all of that work done, and get to closing. And, I'm going to tell you, oftentimes, particularly for new buyers, new investors, you should anticipate a longer period of time than you think. It always takes longer than you think. If you are a established investor, have a relationship with the bank, that's a different story. We can close very quickly. I just had a deal on a shopping center that was 20 million and it closed in 40 days. That's because that was a established investor who had a relationship and was also very organized. And that affects your timing too. And I can't stress to you enough how important it is to be organized, to be on top of your information so that as the lenders are asking you for things, you're not waiting 5 days to get back to them. You're, oh yeah, okay, here I have that. Let me shoot that right over to you, because part of the process is driven by you and your attentiveness to the process. So if you're taking, 3, 4, 5, 6 days in between each response, you're not going to be able to close in a timely fashion, because the lender is going to be driven by you and what they get and their approvals. Now, I will tell you, in the loan that I just did personally, we were really up against a time frame, and so not only was I very responsive, but I was calling, and I know some people on the call probably would hate to hear me say this, but I had some experience with this lender in the work setting, and found that they, sometimes weren't as responsive. So I called them. I told the in-house loan broker, I said, I'm going to call you every day for the next 30 days. And, I know it's difficult to, not everybody, from a lender side, people don't like to hear that, but sometimes that's what it takes to make sure that you're getting done. But don't be calling them every day while you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, because that's not fair to the lender. They're processing, you're not the only loan they're working on, but yours is your only loan. So the burden is on you to make sure that by the time you get to the lender, you're in a good spot, that you are really prepared to move forward. So the agreement of sale, should I use a standard form? As I mentioned, for a single family property that you're buying, the PAR form is fine. You just want to make sure from a timing perspective that it meets with what you need. And read it. I think oftentimes people get, I won't say lazy, I'll say comfortable. Oh, Mary Smith is my broker. She told me it's okay. I'm going to sign it. This is your business. This is your purchase. It is incumbent upon you to read what you are signing. So it's a lot of small print. I get it. It's, a little daunting, but read it, understand it, because each time you read it, the next deal you'll understand better, and the next time, and the next time, so that the review won't take as long your fifth time in, because you're going to understand, oh, here's the things that are really important to me, and I'm going to focus on those. So when you're preparing agreement of sale for a commercial property, obviously the first thing is the buyer. And what's very important in Pennsylvania is, oftentimes many commercial developers buy each property in a different entity name, because that protects the individual projects from liability from another project. So if I own 2 apartment buildings in the same name in the city, and somebody gets a judgment against me, they can execute against both of those, the real estate for both of those properties. Whereas if I had one in, ABC Inc. and one in DEF Inc., and they get a judgment against DEF, they can only go after the assets of that property. And in Pennsylvania, you have to form the entity before you sign the agreement of sale. It's really important. There are ways to get around, there are ways to deal with that, but it's more hassle and more expense than you need if you would just do the simple thing. And the reason I say that is because the state, I don't know, 10, 14 years ago, something along those lines, decided to enforce an old court decision, which allowed the state to collect transfer tax on an assignment of an agreement of sale. Now, the goal of that was, at a time, again, when the market was very hot, people were assigning their agreements of sale for a profit. So I had it under agreement for $10. I flipped it to John Smith for $15. They closed. The state was only getting the state was only getting transfer tax on $10, not on the additional $5 that I got paid. So if you form the agreement of sale in advance, it avoids that issue. If it turns out that you don't end up closing on that property, you can simply shelve that agreement of sale, shelve that entity, and then when the next deal comes up, you can use that entity. And if you don't like the name, you can spend $75 and change the name to match the address of the new property. So another question came up that said, if I have a business entity already, sign the agreement of sale, but then decide to form an entity in the process, can I change the name of the entity anytime before closing? So you can, but it's, anytime you expose yourself to a little bit of liability and you can avoid it, you should. So what, and even what the state years ago in one of their seminars was, you can terminate the existing agreement of sale and sign a new one in the name of the new buyer. You can do a novation agreement and a new agreement in the name of the new entity. But frankly, you're likely, if you have a lawyer, they're going to charge you to do that additional work. And, to me, it's not really worth it. If you're in the business and you're looking to buy real estate, if you don't use that entity for a particular purpose, you can always use it for something else. It doesn't go away. You're not going to owe any tax because you're not, the entity is not active. So, my recommendation is always form it first, then sign the agreement of sale. And I will tell you, particularly now, the state is very behind. So, if you're negotiating the agreement of sale and figure like, oh, the day before I'll form my entity, I wouldn't recommend that, because you're not, typically it used to be you'd form the entity and you get it back then generally the next day. That's not happening now. That's happening, it's taking 10, up to 10 days, 12 days to get it back. Purchase price, that's an obvious one. You've negotiated that. Deposit, how much of a deposit, again, is a negotiated point. Obviously, from a buyer perspective, you want to put down as little as possible, because obviously that means that you have less money at risk. From a seller perspective, they want to make sure that you have enough money that you have a dog in the fight and are not just stringing them along. The condition of title and due diligence, those two things are going to be, important in your agreement of sale. You're going to give yourself an opportunity to get your title commitment, survey if you need it. Surveys are not particularly necessary in Philadelphia. They're much more common outside of Philadelphia, but depending on what kind of project you have, a survey may be required, and you can either use just as an aside, you can use a private surveyor. You don't have to use the city surveyors. The city surveyors are good, but sometimes from a timing perspective, it just doesn't work. They're backed up and they can't get to your survey for 45 days, but you need it in 25 days. So you want to keep those kind of things in mind. Due diligence, you want to make sure you give yourself enough opportunity to review the records of property so that you're getting what you think you're getting. Oftentimes, depending again on the type of property, but if you're doing due diligence, most sellers will require that you get liability insurance for the time period that you're going to be on the property, to ensure that, if you go on the property with your architect and the architect slips and falls, that the owner's not going to be responsible, that it's going to be picked up by your insurance. Representations and warranties, Obviously, this is a push and pull in an agreement of sale. The seller wants to give as few as possible. You want to get as many as possible. There's certainly standard ones that you want to get regarding the condition of the leases, ownership, no notices of violations, no notices of condemnation, no employees, no contracts that survive. Again, it's coming to that compromise on how much you can get, and it depends on the project and to some degree on the seller, what you're going to get. Contingencies, typically in a commercial deal, as I said, financing is not a contingency. You can certainly get financing, but you have to make sure that you're getting the financing in your own time that fits within your timetable. Someone sent a question on the insurance. If your company already has professional liability insurance, will that cover slip and fall on your building's property, or do you need additional insurance? So I think that if you have professional liability insurance and you're going to do due diligence on somebody else's property, I think I don't proclaim to be an insurance expert, but you're going to need liability insurance for the slip and fall on somebody else's property, because professional liability is not going to cover that. But I expect if you're an existing business, you already have some sort of liability coverage. You just will need to add the additional property and the additional owner to the policy for that limited period of time. Transfer tax and apportionments. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, really transfer tax is split 50-50 between the buyer and the seller. And in Philadelphia, that's significant because the transfer tax is a big one. Apportionments, that means real estate taxes, water, rents that if the property's already rented, security deposits that may be held by the seller. So in those, typically the buyer's considered the owner as of the day of closing. So you should be getting a credit for any rents collected, any triple net charges if this is a commercial lease collected through that date. And then you also want to make sure that you leave yourself not leave yourself, but negotiate with the seller, because the seller is going to want to say, okay, I'm selling you a 5-unit. 2 people are 2 months behind on their rent. I want the ability to continue to collect and pursue them. And you want to make sure what you agree to there, because, you're certainly going to have to agree to pay any money that you get that's owed to them back to them. But, you don't like the idea of the seller being able to sue your tenant after the fact. So those are the kind of things that you want to think about. Closing documents, a lot of times it's easier depending on the size of the deal. Oftentimes I just prepare them and attach them. So you're going to have the deed, if it's a rented property, an assignment of the rents, things like that, because then, I've had instances where you don't attach them and then it becomes a dispute at the end on the form of the documents. The deed, not so much, because they are, a special warranty deed is, fairly standard. It's just certain exceptions that they may want to put into the deed. Amendments and extensions, oftentimes if there is you're getting close to your due diligence and you're waiting for some report to come out, it's not going to be in by the end of the due diligence. You're going to need an extension. And I cannot express strongly enough how important it is that you get an extension in writing, signed by both people before the due diligence period expires. You know, I've certainly had people who haven't done that and then come to me and said, but he told me on the phone he was okay with it. Well, you know, your agreement of sale no doubt has language that says the agreement cannot be amended unless in writing, signed by both people. So any oral conversations, oral agreements that you may have had mean nothing. So it is important, and timing is so critical in this period, because it's not like, you know, residential deals where I think people, you know, on the sale of the property where, you know, people sometimes tend to be a little lax on enforcement of timing. But here, it's critical. Your timing is your timing. So if your due diligence expires on April 30th and you do not have an extension, you need to get your termination out. Terminate the agreement of sale. And you can even tell your seller, look, if you're not willing to give me an extension, I'm going to terminate, and we can keep talking. And, you know, you can reinstate the agreement of sale, but do not let yourself get stuck in a property when you haven't done when you feel like you're forced because you've lost track of your timing. You know, that's going to be on you, not the seller. Finally, bulk sales. You know, this is important to include because, as I said, most developers, commercial real estate people own each entity in each property in the name of the separate entity. And so once that entity is gone, you know, it has no money and that's it. And if they owe money to the state and you haven't required them to comply with bulk sales, then you could be held responsible as the successor to pay those taxes. So, you know, in Pennsylvania, it's, you know, the process is not easy because, well, it's easy. I'll say it's easy because all it is you're sending notices to the Department of Labor and Department of Revenue saying this entity is selling all of its, more than 51% of its assets on X date. But, you know, to get an actual tax clearance certificate takes up to a year in Pennsylvania. So it is very critical. It's very critical that you include that bulk sales provision in your agreement of sale. So you're buying, what type of entity should you form for the type of property? It's important to talk to an accountant when you're planning this to decide what makes the most sense for you in your particular type of deal. Is it just going to be you? Is it going to be you and a partner? Is it going to be you and 10 partners? You know, that may impact what you do. You know, and if you have partners or you're thinking of having partners in the deal, it's important that you know, that those people understand the timing and get, so that they know when they have to get their money into you for closing. You know, I've certainly had circumstances before where, you know, it's the day before closing and clients are begging, cajoling to get the partners to get their money in time for closing. So it's really critical if you have partners that you're managing them as well so that they're getting their money in time. You're going to have to come up with your organizational documents, which the filing to form the entity is an easy process, but you know, you're going to have governing documents. If you're a partnership, you're going to have a partnership agreement. If you're an LLC, you're going to have an operating agreement. If you're a corporation, you're going to have bylaws and maybe a shareholders agreement. So once you settle on the form, then you want to get to work to creating those documents. And that's where, again, an attorney can help guide you in, is who's going to be the manager, or is one person going to have the authority? Is it going to take two people? How is that going to work? What will happen if somebody dies? What happens to their share? So all of those kind of things you want to deal with in advance, so that when the situation arises and you haven't dealt with it, that it doesn't derail the business, because now you're in some sort of fight over what happens to this person's share, or we didn't think about this and didn't include it, or we didn't do an agreement. So I think that it is, those things are very important. So somebody raised a very good question, which says, I own a commercial building in my name. Should I create an entity and move my property into the entity's name? So again, here's the dreaded transfer tax. Unfortunately, if you do that, that will trigger transfer tax. And while there are exceptions to the transfer tax application, moving from you to an entity that you formed does not have a exemption. So you're going to pay transfer tax on the assessed value of the property. And as you know, the city has moved, 8 years ago, or I think it was, 8 years ago, to fair market value. So you're going to be paying transfer tax on likely what is, close to the value of your property, which can be very expensive. So if you were going to do that, there would have to be really significant benefits for you to do that, to outweigh the costs that it would involve. The cost to do the transfer isn't expensive. To record a deed is like $258. To prepare the deed would probably be, a few $100s. Then but you can, somebody raised so somebody said, can you add the SPE's name? So you can add somebody to the deed, but again, if I added my mother to my deed, no transfer tax. If I add Hamill Incorporated to my deed, that's going to be transfer tax, because I'm transferring 50%, and not within the limited exclusions, which are generally family members, mother, father, children, grandchildren, grandparents. So you can add them, and you would cut your transfer tax in half, but you're still going to pay transfer tax. So somebody raised a question, with respect to partners, what happens if somebody has an issue, somebody goes to jail, gets arrested, all of that would be, you can build all of that into your partnership agreement, because again, you don't want to be in the situation where you're stuck with something and now you're fighting because the person who went to jail has a wife who is, difficult, and she's meddling where she shouldn't be. So you can address all of those kind of things in your operating agreement, and it goes to that adage about, being prepared. And it's a little bit more expensive on the front end, but it is infinitely cheaper than what's going to happen if you don't address it, because then you're going to fight. And, most times when you have litigation, the only person, the person who wins fully is the lawyers, because the lawyers are going to get paid to fight. And, to me, I don't want to give my money to somebody to fight. I want to give my money to somebody who's going to help me avoid those situations. So I think that that's really important, to raise those issues when you're preparing your agreement, so that your attorney knows And they're going to give you suggestions, things that you hadn't thought of, like, well, maybe, are we going to allow people to transfer to their family members for estate planning purposes or things like that? So they're going to give you ideas as well. Condition of title. Again, this is important because you want to make sure what you're getting and what you have. So I included in here, what would typically be considered permitted exceptions. An exception to title means something that is not going to be the responsibility. It's going to be the responsibility of the seller unless you object to it. There's also exceptions, which are recorded documents against your property. You're buying a property, it has an easement with its neighbors. It has, a creek running through it. It has a PGW gas line running through it, I mentioned before. So those are the kind of things, that you're not getting an insurance for the pipe, the easement running across your property. That's an exception to your policy. And you want to make sure that if that is accepted, that you understand it, you know where it is, and how is it going to impact your property. You're going to want to look at what are other recorded exceptions against your property. The first one, a funny one that sort of has come up a couple times for me is people who are buying, one was a beer distributor, a couple were restaurants who were buying properties that had an exception that you couldn't serve alcohol. Well, that's obviously can be an issue, but most of those kind of exceptions are 100 years old and generally determined not to be enforceable. So, but you want to understand those things. If you have an easement with the neighbor, what does the easement require? Does it require me to maintain something? Is it going to cost me anything? So you want to pay particular attention to title. You want to look at, water, gas, real estate taxes. They're all liens against the property. So you want to make sure on the day that you close that it is clear that, starting day one, you have a clean record. Because if you don't, and you don't get water and sewer charges or gas charges paid at closing, you're responsible for them because they're a lien against the property. And I've had many, many people who've, bought a quick property because they thought it was a good deal. And then it turned out, oh yes, I paid, peanuts for the property, but it's got $14,000 worth of water liens on it. Well, not so much of a deal. So, those kind of things are really important to focus on when you're doing your due diligence. So these are the due diligence checklist items that you're want to be aware of. Zoning, that is one thing that can be a contingency in your agreement of sale, depending on the deal and your seller, if they're willing. So as I mentioned before, I've had people who bought properties who said, oh, they were I bought a 3-unit triplex, but the zoning says 1 unit. Well, if you don't have approval for that, and the city can issue you a violation, and you will either have to get it legalized, and depending on your zoning district, that may require a trip to the zoning board, which can be a 90 to 120 day process at minimum. And it's expensive. So particularly in development as well, if you want to put up a 4-story apartment building, you want to make sure, can I do that by right based on the code? Does that need to go to zoning? And if it does need to go to the zoning board, there's a lot that goes into that, side yards, rear yards, water issues, all of those things are very important. So having somebody who knows zoning is going to be very critical particularly in a development situation. Real estate taxes, again, they're a lien against the property. You're going to want to make sure that they are all paid in full at closing. You're going, if you settle June 1st and the real estate taxes have been paid, because obviously they're due before that, you're going to credit, you're going to credit the seller back for that money, but you're going to know that it is clear. Nothing outstanding. Environmental conditions, again, this is much more in a commercial, in a commercial setting of, I'm buying a piece of property that used to be a dry cleaner. Well, that could be a problem, and that's going to need some probably significant investigation. You're going to want to make sure that you've got enough time to do that. If it's just, an existing four-unit building, likely, the environmental is going to be something very basic, like a questionnaire. But you want to make sure that that's something you're looking at. You're going to look at, if this is a property that's leased, you're going to want to look at the leases so that you understand how much terms left, how much, if there's any landlord work that has to be done. Does anybody have a right of first offer or a right of first refusal to buy the property? Because obviously those are important. If that's in there, you need to get a waiver. The seller needs to get a waiver that that person's waiving it. So, and the leases are going to tell you, are going to help you determine, what the value is to this building. Can you raise the rents? Can you split a unit and make it an additional unit? Those kind of things. Operating expenses, what are they? You're going to want to look at what their real estate taxes are, their snow removal, their electric for common areas, things like that. Again, I mentioned surveys are not generally required in Philadelphia, but in a development it may be. So somebody raised a good question, which is, as a buyer, would I be able to make agreement with the city to pay real estate taxes and still purchase a property? Yes, you can. You're going to, you're going to have to do that in connection with the seller, because obviously you can't make an agreement with the city on a property you don't own, but that can be done. So don't let, if a seller says, look, I just don't have the money, either I'm not going to have, there's not going to be enough money left, you can do that, but you want to make sure, that you're factoring that into your costs and in your purchase price. The city system Atlas, it is very good, and it is something you can do and you can do for free. So you find a property that you like, type in the address, it will give you all sorts of information. Building permits that have been issued, zoning permits that have been issued, the zoning information on the particular property. It's not perfect, because certainly in the transfer of information from paper to the system, things were, not everything ended up where it was supposed to. I have that situation right now where the city thinks that this property is only 12 units, but it's actually 26 because it's two buildings on the same property. There's something missing because all the prior year rental licenses have been issued for 26, but the city doesn't have the records. So you're in a bit of a pickle, because the city's, oftentimes the city's position is, it's your property, you have to keep your records. Our person bought it, got a certification statement from the city that says it's 26 units, and that was that. So, those are the kind of things that can come up, but, having an attorney is great, but for your own education, your own, as you move forward in building your business, you want to be able to do some of this on your own, so that you're not going to a lawyer and spending a couple $1,000s to then find out, oh, this is in a RM1 district. What I want to do isn't permitted there. And I don't want to go to the zoning board. So I think you can do a little of this sort of due diligence on your own to talk to people. And then you have a basis for once you go talk to an attorney. So, we talked about representations. These are the kind of things that you're looking for. You know, they have title, they have the authority to sell. There's no active litigation, no hazardous materials that they're aware of, what the zoning classifications are. There's no violations against the property, contracts that survive, you know, unless you agree to them. You know, you have a snow removal contract. Well, the guy got a good deal. You want to make sure that whatever contracts he has that you do not want after closing, that you make sure they get terminated. What's the status, the leases and occupancy agreements? Again, this may be something that you talk about in your negotiation. Oh, hey, I'm not going to, you know, these 2 units are going to be empty by the time we close. You know, do I want a credit? What condition do I want the units left in? Do I want you to try and release them? Again, status of employees with buying real estate. Typically, it's not as much of an issue because most times, you know, a lot of times they're held in single purpose entities, and they don't have employees. You know, it's more, they have contracts for employees through another company. You just want to make sure they get terminated. Contingencies, financing, as I said, not typically granted in a commercial deal. Sometimes there's a provision where you can, that perhaps you can assume the existing financing. That's a little more complicated and, you know, needs a little more thought in preparing your due diligence and your agreement of sale. Zoning, you know, if you're doing a development and the seller is willing, you know, closing's contingent on you getting approval to build a 7-unit building. And if you don't, the agreement gets terminated, but you're going to have a certain period of time to do that. And it's, again, going to be critical that you are very on top of your process and your paperwork and your project. Lender approval, again, this is if you're getting a loan, you're factoring, you know, that's not going to be contingency unless it's a assumption of a loan. 1031 exchange, not really contingency. 1031 is a tax strategy which allows you, if you've bought a property 5 years ago, you're selling because, you know, I had a 5-unit, I want to go bigger, I'm buying a 10-unit, you can take the proceeds from that, the sale of the 5-unit, and move it on to the 10. You want to make sure you include that in your agreement of sale. Again, this is where an attorney can help you to see whether the 1031 exchange makes sense for you. Environmental inspections, again, we talked about this. Depending on your project, it may be as simple as a environmental questionnaire. It may be, you know, a phase 1, which is a very basic. It may be, you know, more significant, as we talked about, if you're buying an old gas station to develop, or you're buying an old dry cleaner, then that can be more significant and something you want to spend time on. Defaults, the seller defaults. You want the return of your interest, your deposit plus the interest, because you're going to have your deposit in an interest-bearing account. Reimbursement of out-of-pocket expenses. Again, this is a toughie, you know, that you're going to negotiate. You know, you want to be reasonable. How much am I really spending on my due diligence? And, you know, what do I really expect to spend? You always want to have the right for specific performance, which means that if they decide, oh, I'm not selling, Bob Jones offered me, you know, 50,000 more, that you can then sue the seller to force them to sell you the property based on the agreement of sale. If you default, you want a notice requirement that the seller give you notice of the default. And number 2, always, 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 always limit the deposit retaining the deposit as the sole remedy of the seller. Transfer tax split 50-50. As I mentioned, in Philadelphia, transfer tax is a biggie, 4.278%. One of that goes to the state, the rest goes to the city. So again, that's why, these transfers, adding people deeds, transfer tax always has to be at the forefront of your mind because it's a big, big expense. And that's where we talked about assignments. That was really the intent with the assignment, was to capture that money. But, there hasn't been anything in writing that says that. Which is why you want to be very careful when crafting your agreement of sale as who's your buyer. Apportionments, we talked about, utility charges, taxes, rent, security deposits. Obviously, you get all of the security deposits, and you want to make sure you have accounted for those, the seller's accounted for those. In a commercial transaction, as part of your agreement of sale, you can also ask for an Estoppel Certificate, which is a document that would be signed by the seller that says, yes, my lease started X, expires Y. I have two options to extend. My rent is $10. My security deposit is $20. I don't have any claims against the landlord, things like that. So again, if you're buying a single family property to rent, you're not going to get an estoppel. But if you're buying a property that has 3 residential and a commercial on the first floor, asking for an estoppel is certainly very reasonable. Here's your closing documents, city certification statement, very important, and a CO. City certification tells me tells you A, what the permitted use of the property is, and B, if there's any open violations. City certification statement is a requirement by code. So don't let somebody tell you they don't have to give it to you. They do. It is a requirement. Certificate of occupancy, this can come into an issue depending on what your certification says. If you're buying an older building, may have been before COs were required. So again, having someone who's familiar is very important to figuring out whether that's something that needs to be addressed. Assignment of leases, security deposits, that's where the seller assigns to you all their interest in all of those things, and you agree to accept that. FERPTA certificate is just a document that says, my company name, my EIN number, my address, and confirms that I'm not a foreign entity, so they don't have to withhold any money from the proceeds. Bill of sale is where the seller assigns to you everything, all their interests in the personal property that runs the building. Seller certificate, that's a certificate that you can ask for in your agreement of sale, in which they certify that all the representations they made to you in the agreement of sale 3 months ago are still true. The HUD-1 is the actual settlement statement where you figure out the money between the apportionments, how much you owe, how much the seller's getting, and your title insurance policy. They'll mark up their title at closing, and then you'll get your policy after the fact. Make sure that you actually get your policy. A lot of times people don't pay attention and they have a claim 4 years down the road, and it doesn't mean you can't still make a claim because you have your marked up title, but having the policy makes the situation much easier. Project costs. Again, these are the things you want to consider. Hard costs, brick and mortar, usually 70-80% of your budget. Soft costs, which are your architect, engineer, permits, insurance, all of those things. You want to make sure, because these are all going to factor in when you go to your lender, because your lender is going to have fees. You're going to pay their attorney fees, appraisals, environmental costs, if you have to pay them any points. So having your numbers work is so important. And your working with your lender can help you with that, because they can guide you as well and say, oh, hey, look, I think, you're putting a little too much money into X. That's not going to get you a lot of value. Let's shift that money over to here. When you're going to talk about your site work expenses, what needs to be done, how much all of that is going to cost. And I've just attached, you can take a look at your leisure, sample budgets. Where can you get money? PIDC. You can look at grants. The city has various grant programs. You can go to a traditional bank like, First Republic, TD, all of those hard money lenders. Hard money lender means it's somebody who's charging you much more than the current interest rate, and is going to have much more stringent terms. So if current mortgage rates, commercial mortgage rates are 4.25, commercial lenders, hard money lenders probably going to charge you about anywhere from 14 to 25%. So, that is the money of last resort. Federal, state, and city loan programs are out there. The websites for these are very helpful. Equity investors, maybe you have 5 friends who all want to go in and start into this real estate business. Everybody puts up some money. If you do that, that's great, but you want to work out all of your wrinkles in advance. Post-closing, you want to make sure with the city you get the various licenses that you need. Depending on what you're doing, everybody needs commercial activity license and a tax account. You want to look at what types of tax to register for. If you're renting property, you have to get a license. If you're a restaurant, food service, things like that. Philly Eclipse system is a great resource. You can set up an account, track your licenses and whatnot through that system. And here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions, I certainly can stick around for a few minutes to answer them. Anything I didn't answer, anything you need further clarification on, I'm happy to do.
Dorothy, thank you. We have a couple of questions. I'm going to unmute Consularis, Q Consularis. Can you unmute, please? And ask your question. Q Consularis. Okay, that person is not responding. Anyone else? I apologize I think I said at the beginning that we were going until 11:30, and we actually are going to 11. But Dorothy has graciously offered to stay a few minutes longer if anyone has questions or comments. I know Dorothy was doing a great job making the presentation and following the chat. And answering the chat. It's a lot of information. I do, in addition to Dorothy, who has been an outstanding presenter for us, I do want to acknowledge 2 of my colleagues from here at PIDC who work in our real estate finance division. And that is Lawrence McComey. He's our VP for real estate finance. Lawrence, is there anything that you want to say? Do you want to unmute? I'm not sure if you're totally here, or I know we also have, you might be here. Loan committee is over. Lawrence, do you want to unmute and give a few words?
Oh, yes. Good morning. How is everyone? First of all, I'd like to say that was a very informative presentation. It covered all the details, even tried to ask some questions myself. It's good to I think the clarity around the acquisition and the problems that can cause in proposing making it letters of interest, and finalizing the agreement of sale was very important there, and also about the transfer taxes and how that can impact deals. So many times people buy the projects in one name and then have to transfer it according to a new structure at a later time. So it's often good, we like to say, PIDC, please get your lenders involved early, or your counsel at least, so that when you're making these initial decisions, it doesn't cost more later down the road. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Lawrence. I want to acknowledge also my colleague Savannah Mudd, who works in our real estate finance group as an administrator and analyst. Savannah, I know you have also been monitoring the chat and responding, so unmute and go right ahead.
Hi, all. The only thing that I want to add is that you should join us next Thursday, as I believe Marla already put in the chat. But a colleague from the real estate finance team, Sarah Stroni, will be presenting on the ways, focusing more on the financing aspect, as well as building a cohesive project team for doing a real estate development. So please show up next Thursday, same time, same place. But
Great.
register. So not exactly the same place, different Zoom link.
Different Zoom link. That's very, very important. I do want to, let's see. Q Consularis, your hand is still raised. I'll lower that. Dorothy, we did get a question in the Q&A. It says, if you are a startup and you have found a space that is commercial, now they say commercial/residential space, I'm assuming that is mixed use, that can cover the mortgage, is it possible to get a loan for the property? Lawrence is on here, Savannah's on here, Dorothy is on here. We get these kinds of questions all the time. If you are a startup and you have found a space that is commercial and residential space, I'm guessing it's mixed use, that can cover the mortgage, is it possible to get a loan for the property if you're a startup? And I think that is the operative word if you're a startup.
I certainly think you can get a loan. It's certainly not going to be as easy as an established business, but there are certainly, startups, particularly if the financials are strong of the borrowers and the property is a good value, has good cash flow, there's certainly no reason you can't get a loan. And I think that one thing that I will include in that is, you should expect as a startup that they're likely going to require the principals to guarantee the loan, which means that if the entity that buys the property, ABC Inc., cannot pay the loan for whatever reason, something happens, they can't pay the loan, the lender is then going to look to John and Mary, who guaranteed the loan, and get the amounts owed from them. So, typically it's, investors who have more than 20% are required to guarantee. Sometimes, depending on the loan, they may require all guarantors, not just the principals. So that's something that you want to make sure that you're aware of as you're working through that, because if you're going to have to guarantee and there are other people, there's 3 people who are going to guarantee, you want to make sure you're going to want to have a separate agreement in that situation that says, if all 3 of us are guarantors and owe $100 and I pay $100, I want to make sure that I get $33.33 from the other 2 people and that it doesn't all fall on me. So those are the kind of, considerations you want to have in going into a loan. And if you're not willing to personally guarantee, then the loan process becomes, much more difficult, because even established long-term developers have to, have situations and they have to personally guarantee.
Very good question.
Yeah.
That was it.
Can I
Go ahead,
add to
Lauren.
that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, what was said is very important, and that's actually our requirements at PIDC. What we like to also add, though, is that also, although the business is a startup, we like to see the principals and even those guaranteeing with a considerable amount of experience in what they're starting up. So if this is a new business, we want to see that, they've had experience working for it at companies with similar background.
We have a question. Thank you, Lawrence. We have a question that came up. Do you have information on 704 or 705 mortgage programs? I'm not familiar with those. I don't know if those are residential. Dorothy or Savannah or Lawrence, do you have a response to that?
I do not. I don't know if that's
I will, let me open it to someone in the audience. If you know of 704, 705, we can certainly look it up for you and get some information on it, but we do not. And the reason PIDC does not is because PIDC typically does not provide financing to residential. Our financing goes into commercial, and our financing goes into mixed use projects where it is commercial and residential, and our portion only goes into the commercial piece. So if there's someone who knows about 704, 705, please raise your hand and let me know. Other than that, I'm going to move on to Erica, who has her hand raised. Erica, if you will unmute your mic and ask your question.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can. Your voice is soft. If you could just speak up a little louder.
Sure. Thank you so much for this great presentation that Dorothy put on. I just want to say kudos to her and kudos to you guys for doing this. One of my number one question is, Dorothy, are you on, if someone is interested in your services, can they put you on a retainer? That's number one.
definitely, yes. You contact me, talk about what you want to do, if I can help, the scope of the project, and then we can talk about, what sort of retainer makes sense.
Okay, great. Great. Now, the other question that I wanted to know was, you had talked a lot about the due diligence, right? And also the contingency. If I was to buy, because right now I'm working on buying a commercial mixed property, but I'm not getting like regular financing. What I'm doing is a creative financing strategy with this particular homeowner. And I wanted to find out, since I am buying this property as is, and we are using cash to buy this particular property, do I still need to have those, oh God, I had put it in a thing. Do I have to have that contingency? God, I had it, I wrote it down. Oh, I think it has something to do with, I'm so sorry, I changed the page. There was a contingency in there.
I think I just put up the due diligence checklist. Is it from the checklist, or is it from the contingency slide?
I think it was from it wasn't from the contingency slide. I had put the question in the chat. I turned the page. Just forget it.
So the one thing I would just say, Erica, and if you're buying something cash, just make sure you do inspections. you want to check for, I'm looking at seller representations and warranties. You want to look for clean title on the building, on the property. You want to look for any hazardous materials. If it's residential, does it have any tanks in the basement that have not been removed? Philadelphia has old housing stock. Inspections are really important. You might have termite damage. You might have structural damage, foundations. So just be real careful if you're paying cash without inspection. I'm not sure if that was your question, but those are some of the due diligence items that are not. So for PIDC, for example, Lawrence and Savannah, do you want to talk about some of the due diligence we require on a commercial property?
Can I jump in just for a second to say
Sure.
that even though you're buying as is, that's fine. But in buying as is, you want to make sure you understand what that is condition is, which is exactly what Marla was speaking to, is it's fine if you're agreeing, because in a commercial transaction, you are buying as is. But that's why you have that opportunity to do your inspections so that you know what that exact condition is and you're not surprised after closing.
Yes, so right now we are running title, so waiting for title to actually come back. Oh, this is the question. It was about the transfer taxes, because I know that you had talked about being 50-50. But with this particular sale, again, this is a creative financing deal that we're doing. So we are not doing 50-50. We are paying the transfer taxes. He owes a lot of money on real estate taxes. So that's why I had asked you, will I still be able to purchase this property with an agreement with the city of Philadelphia to be able to still purchase this, even though he is behind on, we would be taking over those behind taxes.
Right, so that means that that's fine, because what happens is your title company, whereas typically real estate taxes will be removed as an exception from title, your title company is not going to remove that as an exception, and you're going to be buying that property subject to those real estate taxes. As
Yes,
long as you know that, that's fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But I still wanted to hear the due diligence that you guys are looking at when it comes to doing the commercial property stuff.
Erica, thank you. Lawrence, do you want to, or Savannah, do you want to speak on the due diligence items required by PIDC? I did put up the checklist, which is not too different from what Dorothy presented to you already. We're kind of probably right on the same page.
Yeah, I would only add, and I mean this, what Dorothy was saying, very important, and this list as well. There are a lot of environmental concerns you may want to consider during the due diligence process. So whatever you're negotiating, if it's an agreement of sale, letter of interest, you may want to have enough time so that you can actually go in and get the property inspected. You should always have someone like construction, sometimes a contractor or someone like that to go with you, or a professional inspector to really look for major damage or structural damage to the property that can really impact your renovation costs if the renovation's required. Very rarely do you have you buying a property that's construction's completed and you're ready to move in or actually refit for a new tenant. So, but if it's one that would require some work, I would say you'd probably want to get inspecting to make sure that there are no foundational issues, environmental issues that could affect the cost of the renovation budget.
Great. And Savannah put in the chat also that these are some of the issues that we will review in part 2 also, because as you are seeking your financing, those are the kinds of due diligence items that we will be looking at. We have a question that came up and we put it in the chat. Someone said, I've owned my business for 19 years. I've owned my business for 19 years. And the two owners, one deceased now and under an estate, will be selling me the building. While they get the estate in order, is there any way to get prepared with a commercial loan before I have an agreement of sale? Sounds like a sticky one, a sticky legal issue, Dorothy.
Well, you can certainly start the process in, talking to a lender, start getting your information together. I mean, the fact is the lender's not going to do much until you have an agreement of sale in place, because they're, you don't want to waste money with paying for a deal that may not go forward before you even have it under agreement. So you can certainly, if you have a lender, talk to them, explain to them the situation. They can start giving you a general sense of like, these are the kind of things that we're going to need from you, so that you'll be prepared once the estate issue is resolved. Now, estate issues don't have to be terrible. They can be very, really run of the mill. I just had one. It took them about 60, 70 days to resolve everything. The problem comes in where, if you're buying a property that's been, the owner had died and there's lots of heirs that are unknown, and you have to do all sort of this investigation. But if, it's a simple, they just died, there's an estate, there's no reason that can't be a smooth transaction, in theory.
Great. Are there other questions? It's 11:20 now. And so even though I made the mistake early on and said we were going to 11:30, we were only supposed to do an hour and a half, but we're at 20 minutes over. And again, Dorothy is so kind to be with us. If there are other questions, we certainly want to make sure that you get this. This has been a standing webinar with us, and you can see why we continue to do this. Dorothy is one of the absolute best real estate attorneys that we have here in the city, and PIDC is very, very fortunate to be able to work with her. Again, we are only presenting to you who PIDC believes are the best subject matter experts, because when we present someone to you, we are putting our full faith and confidence in the service that they provide and the product that they provide. And so we would say, when you are in need of a real estate attorney, when you need support, and when you're doing real estate, you always need a real estate attorney, then we highly suggest that you consider Dorothy. There's her contact information again. If there are no more questions from those of you who are here, we thank everyone who has come. There are some people I see on this call who I haven't seen in a while, so some of you know who you are, so I just say thank you. And one of these days we will see you in person again. I do want to remind you of the upcoming, I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to do a new share and roll through the announcements that we went through earlier today, what is coming up. Let's see. Remember, part 2 is next Thursday, May 19th from 9:30 until 11. And I did put the registration in the link. Each of these webinars is separate. Someone mentioned in the chat, we also are doing this 2-part series in Spanish. So for the Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs who have the same interest, we are doing this series with the Latina professionals, real estate professionals. And so we encourage you to go onto our website. We're offering it in the evening. It's a 2-part series. We're offering it in the evening. And for those who prefer a morning series, we're also offering it in the morning. Make sure you go to the PIDC website, and you have to register for each individual session. Remember, on May 17th, we're going to do an information session. This is just a standard information session for the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program. And then on June 7th, we're going to expand the information session for Goldman Sachs, and we're going to host a panel discussion of business owners who have completed the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program and have received PIDC financing. So you'll hear from those entrepreneurs who took advantage of Goldman Sachs. Alan Heggs, you're on here. Do you want to say something about Goldman Sachs really quickly before we leave? Can you unmute yourself? Do you hear me, Alan? All right, he's not. I don't hear him. I do know that he is, I think, second or third generation business owner, and took advantage of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, and has been doing he was always a good businessman. He's just more phenomenal now. On that panel will be Natasha Strother of Strother Enterprises, which is a food service company. If you have been at the airport and had Subway, then that is one of their businesses. If you've been at the stadiums, they have several concession stands at the stadiums. If you've been at the Pennsylvania Convention Center, they are also there. So Natasha Strother will be on that panel. Jeanette Harris, a principal with Financial Integrity Resource Management company known as Firm, an insurance company that provides insurances all over the country. A lot of it I think they've been working with PIDC. So they are one of our consultants. So she will be on the panel. Lynn Thomas, we're super proud of, we're proud of all of our clients, but Lynn Thomas and Supra EMSCO took where they have been leasing for almost the life of the business, for the entire life of the business. And Lawrence and Savannah worked on that transaction where they purchased land, vacant land in our industrial park, and then we helped finance the construction of a new warehouse. They're doing, Lawrence, they're doing, is it some lab chemicals and lab supplies in addition to their base business, which have been, which have been office supplies. But now they're doing lab and medical supply, not necessarily medical supplies, but like lab supplies. But we help them with their financing and the land and their construction. And then the last person is Pecha Chang, who is the owner of Bolt and Vine in East Falls, a really innovative designer type florist. So if you've not been on Midvale Avenue to Bolt and Vine in East Falls, you owe it to yourself. You would be very, very pleased with the service that you get there. So that is on June 7th. That's our panel. Then again, once you're on our website, please make sure you stay in touch with us. Sign up for the newsletter so you hear about everything that's going on with us, and make sure you're on our social media platforms. That's where you really get most of the information. We're on social media constantly. And then after today's webinar, we will replay it on YouTube and on our blog. And then again, there are still COVID resources that are available. They are winding down. So as those funds wind down, we will get back into our more traditional financing, but there are still a few. We just found out yesterday that Comcast Rise has, and they are a partner with us. If you can see at the bottom of the screen, we are in partnership with Comcast Rise. And so they have opened up Philadelphia as one of multiple cities across the country where they are offering up to $10,000 grants, as well as marketing upgrades to your company. So we'll get that information out to you. But for now, just go to Comcast Rise on its website, get that information, and we'll get the deadline dates to you. So with that, as they say in church, if all hearts and minds are clear, this is the end. It is 11:28. So we thank you, Dorothy, again for never telling us no. That means a lot. So thank you so much, and everyone. The virus is still out there. Still out there, so please stay masked up. Somebody said they could see my some of my team's chat on the screen. So, you know, we've had a little exposure here, so we're just finding out. But everybody stay well, stay masked up. It's still out there. Take good care and see you soon.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.